Hi, this is Linda and Aaron with Traveling Flamingo. We've got some exciting news for the Americas and cruising. The CLIA has come out with their core elements of what's going to be required for cruising.
Cruising might be back in North America.
So we're going to go over all that and more coming right up.
So today we're going to talk about what the Cruise Line International Association, or CLIA, has sort of said about resuming cruising in North America. The CLIA, which is the abbreviated form, represents about 95% of the global ocean cruise industry. So this includes all of your regular brands like Carnival, Princess, Holland America, Royal Caribbean. All of them are included in the CLIA.
So this week on September 21st, the big announcement came out. They're looking at the health protocols to phase in the resumption of cruising in the Americas. And we've seen a lot of successful cruising now start in Europe. There have been cruises that just go out and come back without any ports. We've seen cruising in the Mediterranean and Italy with ports. So it's really promising to see that. And I think that we're hoping to get it started and with these core elements to get it started in America.
A lot of that came from the European cruise industry, who sort of worked really closely with a bunch of different groups to sort of set some of these standards. And it seems as though there's some of this trickling into America finally. Yeah,
so it's positive to see the start there because really the largest cruise market is the Caribbean, Mexico, and Central America, the Americas. So being able to start cruising in this part of the world is going to be really big for a lot of the economies and companies there as well. And if you want to know more about our European sailings and how those have gone, we've done a bunch of videos about that, some of the pros and cons, how successful it was. So make sure you check out those videos.
We'll put some links up in the corner or in the first comment below about those videos. There's two key ones that talks about everything that the EU is doing in terms of cruising. And then we have a bunch of other videos, obviously, talking about how that's gone.
Yeah, so these new elements that the CLIA has announced is really going to be, it's come from the scientists, medical experts, the cruise line, the Healthy Sail panel, and more. And so they've really tried to get a good, well-rounded view on what needs to be done to make sure that cruising can come back safely and be healthy for the crew, for passengers in your local communities as well.
And they brought together a really big panel. I know a lot of companies are doing this with medical experts to help inform what they're doing. And, I would sort of say, finally, they've done it here for a bit of the American cruise lines. And so that's great that some of these recommendations are included.
Yeah, it's the initial restart. We're going to be looking at sort of a slow phasing back, primarily with U.S. ports. And you're going to see a change in your experience from booking all the way to debarkation. And I think that's the world we're living in now. And we could potentially still see some cruising in 2020. So this is very promising to have these elements come out.
Yeah, absolutely. There's going to be a bunch of changes, of course, as you can expect for something like this. But at least that opportunity to get back to cruising will be in place. And, it's looking forward to getting on some of those ships. It'll, tell us what you think. Are you kind of interested to go explore some cruise ships, or are you more interested in the ports? Would you want some of those cruises that are just, maybe you leave from a U.S. port, maybe you hit one or two other ones, then you come right back and you enjoy the ship? Or do you really enjoy those ports like Cozumel and those other ports that you get off at and sort of enjoy those areas? So, tell us in the comments what you prefer.
So let's get right into what these core elements are. And these are what have to be included for cruising to resume. So number one, and this is huge, is that testing needs to be done for 100% of the passengers and crew. Every single person who wants to get on that cruise ship will need to have a test done. And I don't know how happy everybody's going to be about that. Kids, adults, it didn't, what's the test experience going to be? So I think that's going to be a big deal, but also huge for safety.
The other thing, though, is a lot of those, as much as this is an amazing step forward to make sure that people are tested to get on the ship, it doesn't always catch everybody. So, don't fall into a false sense of security that just because you were tested before you get on the ship, if you have very low quantities of COVID or other potential diseases, I guess, it doesn't always detect those. So, this is great and obviously takes a huge number of people who could potentially be sick out of the, the pool of people on your ship, but it is not 100%. So just to level set, like, this is great and covers a lot of people, but there is still risk. So,
Definitely, and I think that's why they have the rest of the protocol as well.
Exactly.
So it's a good reminder: don't be too casual don't be COVID casual once you're on the ship, because there's a chance it can still be there. So that's another one. Another huge one that I think could affect people's experience is having to wear a mask. So whenever physical distancing cannot be maintained, you have to put a mask on. So that's going to be when you're walking from the hallways, the elevators, and depending other areas of the ship, having to have a mask. And it also means always having a mask with you. Being back at work now, I know I got my cool little fanny pack, so I always have my mask and gloves and hand sanitizers with me. Is that what we're going to see people having to have with them as well on the ship?
And it'll be interesting because there's a sort of a direct correlation to distancing along with the amount of people on the ship. So it'll be interesting to see how many people they're booking, right? Like, is this gonna be like the airlines where, originally they said they'll leave gaps and then it's 100%? Like, what's that gonna be? Because the ships are obviously small, it's a finite size. And so social distancing will be affected by the number of people on the ship. And that kind of gets us to the next point on social distancing, to ensure that you do have the proper distance between people and you can maintain that. So it'll be interesting to see how that correlates to how busy the ship is. Yeah,
and this core component of the distancing, it's not just on the ship. It's also in the terminals. Yeah. It's also on the private islands, and it's also on the shore excursions. So as we're seeing, like, physical distancing is a really important element, and it's good to see that it's included as well.
The other side of that is ventilation. So obviously getting a lot of clean air in from the outside, which again, inside of a ship isn't always the easiest. But you saw those with Norwegian Cruise Line, who's putting in those HEPA filters that is able to block some of this, bringing in fresh air from the outside, or just being outside. I think a lot of us on ships like to be outside, but this will affect stuff like the shows that you have in the theaters and areas where you can't really bring in fresh air because you've got to go ahead and be there with a bunch of people and there's no sort of windows and stuff.
I'm very interested to see how they can be creative in doing that. I'm so used to having the automatic doors open and close. In buffets, often you don't have windows that open. In restaurants, like, very rarely, and I guess you're out at sea in the wind, and it's very rarely do you have opportunities to have fresh air coming in except in your cabin. So I'm interested to see if they are feasibly able to do that, how they're going to do that. The next core component is medical capability. So each ship is going to be responsible for specific plans to manage medical needs. They have to have a certain amount of cabins that are going to be dedicated for isolation rooms if somebody does start appearing to have symptoms. You also are going to need to have plans for shoreside quarantine and medical facilities and transportation. So no more of this being the whole cruise ship quarantined on the ship. It's making sure that there is a plan with a port that people can be quarantining on land if they need to be.
And this is another big one. We talk about it in those 2 European rules for cruising, that it's broken up between the customer experience, but also the plans and the sort of the experience that the cruise operator needs to go through. And these plans, making sure that you have some sort of, acceptable place to bring people is so important. You saw that with the Diamond Princess when they had COVID on there and there was just no plan. So this is really important.
Yeah, I think this is one of those things you're not going to experience. It's not going to affect your daily day-to-day on a cruise ship and your trip. But if something does come up, fortunately, the experience should be more positive. And the last one is shore excursions, and making sure that the cruise operators have strict protocol and expectations. Passengers must follow these expectations, and if they don't comply, then they're not going to be allowed to reboard, which we've actually already seen in Europe. A family had paid for a shore excursion, left the group, and then tried to reboard later, and they said no. So, if you are looking to be on one of these first potential cruises that are going out in the fall, don't be trying any funny business. Make sure that we're following the protocol, because no one wants to be the first cruise ship. No one wants to have any issues or outbreaks, and they are going to be following those protocol to, again, make sure that all the passengers, all the crew, and the communities are safe.
Yeah. And again, each of the cruise operators in this group can add more rules to this. This is sort of the de facto base standard. And on top of that too, they will be checking these measures continuously to make sure they're effective and make sure that they're doing what they need to do to protect the public.
Yeah, so we also have a few points from other people in the industry and what their thoughts were on the core components. So the Prime Minister of Barbados, Maya Montley, she was in favor of it. She acknowledged, tourism is a huge part of their economy. They're very interested in having it start up again and start up again soon, and she's all for 100% of testing of passengers and crew. And she thinks that it's going to be unique and crucial for cruising to have this in place, but it will help bring some confidence to passengers and locals to know that everybody has had the testing done.
Yeah, in addition to that, the Miami-Dade County mayor had turned around and said that, with all of this that's going on in Europe, there's some good signs that this is able to sort of move to North America and we're able to open up again. And that there is sort of evidence of leadership in terms of this, where I think, historically there was a bit of, they were on the back foot when it came to how you were going to manage COVID-19 on ships. And they're starting to show more and more leadership about how they're going to do it. And, overall, I think it's great that they're sort of getting in front of this thing. They're, getting those medical panels together. And absolutely, we still need to manage the number of infections in any given area. However, at least there's plans, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, sure, these could spike and we could have a lot of issues in different parts of the world. However, at least there's plans on how to manage that.
I have to say, I feel a lot more confident to get on a cruise ship right now than I do a plane. The protocol that they're going through, these cruise ships are going to be cleaner than they've ever been before. The social distancing that's taking place, and we've seen already from cruise ships how few pool chairs are out. There's just way less people on the ship that you can be by the pool and be spread out, not high-fiving a stranger right next to you while you're having your drink, right? I think that knowing that all that's in place, as you mentioned just now, the airplanes are 100% capacity. So you're shoulder to shoulder and people do have their masks on, but there's no mandatory testing and there's no requirement for social distancing. So, the cruise line has had a lot of eyes on them and a lot of criticism and they are responding and making sure that they're making it as safe as possible so that this doesn't happen.
Yeah, I think it's a lot harder with a cruise ship. You're on it longer. Like at airplanes, you're on and you get off within, at most, 24 hours. Whereas cruise ships, you're on, 4 days, 5 days, 7 days, even longer. And so there's more opportunity for those things to actually sort of incubate while you're on the ship. And I think this is an important way of trying to help solve that. I do think it's not going to be zero. I think we're still going to hear about certain ships that may have COVID on them, but they need to get ahead of it and you cannot let it spread on those ships. And I think a lot of these things that they are trying to put in place is to prevent that, right? To make sure that if you're on the ship, it doesn't spread like wildfire like we'd seen in other things. And you're not sitting on a ship for days or weeks that are quarantined. You've actually got places to go. You've got hospitals you can send people and you're able to get people off when needed and if people are diagnosed with it.
Yeah, the CLIA president and CEO Kelly Craighead had an opinion as well. So this is actually a quote from her. "We recognize the devastating impact that this pandemic and the subsequent suspension of cruise operations has had on economies through the world, including the nearly 500,000 members of the wider cruise community and small businesses in the Americas who depend on this vibrant industry for their livelihoods. Based on what we are seeing in Europe and in the following months of collaboration with leading public health experts, scientists, and governments, we are confident that these measures will provide a pathway for the return of limited sailing in the U.S. before the end of this year." So that's a big deal, confident in it. We're seeing it in Europe. There's 500,000 people in the Americas that this is, businesses that this has impacted. And by the end of this year, that's a bold statement to make, especially because we're still in a ban until October. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, I think overall too, a lot of people who are going to be going on these cruises are people that love cruises. And if you are on some of these early cruises, please do respect some of these rules just so that we don't have more and more, so the bad press that you get when COVID shows up. So I think it's really important that at least in these early days that we're all being very cautious and we're all being very mindful of it as this starts rolling out and getting bigger and more people in cruise ships and people feeling more confident. So I think it's something that we all kind of own to try to be safe, right?
Well, in thinking of that, like when we think about, okay, so what's my experience going to be like? What's my trip going to be like? I'm paying thousands of dollars. I'm taking my family. Are we getting on a plane? Are we able to drive there? Like, what's my experience really going to be? I mean, the masks. For me, I've been wearing them for hours a day at work. I have to say it's not a big deal. We went to the ROM the other week with our family. We had it on for 8 hours there, except for our half an hour lunch break. And it doesn't for me ruin my experience. I still had a wonderful time at the museum. But for some people, it irritates their skin. They break out, finding ones that fit properly. Glass fog is a real thing, so I think for some people, especially with that fog, the glass fog, it's really, that can dampen their experience for them.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, the ROM is the Royal Ontario Museum. So that's one of the major museums in Canada. And, of course, they've got a mask required policy. Distancing is another thing. You got to make sure that you are keeping a distance where you can. The ROM's a good example of where there wasn't necessarily the ability to always keep distance between people, but you've got the mask policy for that, but trying to maintain it where you can.
Well, and I think for some people, when they go on cruise ships, they do go to meet other people, and they go to other countries to meet people in those countries and really experience it. So I think people will have to, depending on what your goal is, especially when you cruise, being aware that it's not as free to meet people, and other people may not be interested in meeting people in other social bubbles, because we did see, again in Europe, a family that went to the cruise terminal in a van. Somebody tested positive. Everybody who traveled with that family in the van was not able to board. So people might be thinking, I'm going to keep to my bubble. I'm going to keep to myself. We're going to enjoy ourselves. But yeah, if you're somebody who likes to go and likes to meet people, I don't think it's going to be the same.
Yeah, it'll be very different, right? Because you're going to have to kind of keep to your bubble in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and then with the shore excursions, I think a lot of people, like for us, some of our trips, like we're going to see parts of the world that we've never seen before and get a little taste for it, decide, when we go back, how we go back, and how many ports are going to be open. You have to do the excursions with the companies. You don't quite have that freedom. So is that going to deter people as well? Or is it nice to at least get to go and do something?
Yeah. Well, and I think, lastly, something to really remember about this is make sure you plan out where your cabin is, because inevitably these elevators are going to be packed because you're not going to be able to have as many people. A lot of the time it's only one family. And for those of you who have been on cruise ships, those elevators get jammed, especially when you're boarding and disembarking. And so do be, aware as to where your cabin is. And I think this will become at least a COVID cruise tip in terms of pick a cabin somewhere where you think you're going to be the most, because it's going to be a lot of stairs and probably the odd elevator that you're able to get on. Yeah,
somewhere you're going to be the most, and being aware if you have problems with stairs, then maybe you don't want to be on one of the top floors, because, as Erin said, that could become an issue. And we did have it actually on our Norwegian cruise. The last day, there were people waiting 45 minutes for an elevator because we were near the top, and every time it came, it was full, and it was a mess. We ended up carrying our bags down the stairs, but we are able to do that. So I think that's a good point, is to be aware of the stairs where it's located.
Because, a lot of the time the restaurants and the Lido decks are up at the top of the ship. So if that's what you're going for, then go for the top of the ship. And if you're more somebody who likes the theaters and the shops and that sort of stuff, they're usually in the lower decks.
Or be ready to wait for elevators. That could be it. And I mean, the cruise in Italy, it was a 2,000 passenger ship. They had 500 people. So you might not even have that much of a wait at first. It's just going to depend on the capacity of the ships.
I think as cruising starts picking up more, the elevators will get busier. I think it's one of those things that when you first go on the first cruise, there's probably going to be almost nobody. But then as hopefully it's more positive in terms of people being able to manage COVID, you're going to get more and more people, and that's going to drive more of this.
So all in all, I think this is really great news for cruising in North America. It's starting up again. I know that there are people who do still have cruises. They're waiting for November and December, and hopefully they're able to get on them, and not us. So let us know how it goes, because we're not going to be able to do that. But we're very excited. Thank you so much for watching our video. We really do hope that you found it enjoyable and entertaining and informative. Please do hit that like and subscribe button. Let us know in the comments below your thoughts, feelings on these core elements, and if you will be cruising anytime soon. Thanks again for watching, and happy travels.